Quickly then, let's welcome on show Adi Godrej, Chairman at Godrej Industries, who joins in on the show for more details on how business is actually shaping up for Godrej Industries. Mr. Godrej, hi, good morning. Firstly, let's talk a little bit more about how have you viewed the reform push that we've seen from the government, and does that make corporate India more hopeful of further reforms in the pipeline?
Yes, definitely. I think the first moves are very good. It needs to be continued. I think there's a cabinet meeting today. I expect more announcements of reforms. I think the reforms that can be done by executive action will be done very soon. The problem might be on reforms that need parliamentary approval. We do hope that those also can be put through, because that's the only way to get India back into a high growth mode.
Mr. Godrej, good morning. Nikunj Dalmia also joining in. Mr. Godrej, one side of the argument is that FDI in retail, FDI in aviation, these are symbolic measures. They will not change the GDP. They will not fix the investment climate. They are symbolic measures and they will not add to the earnings.
No, I don't think they are symbolic. They are very important reform measures, but I agree with you, they won't accelerate the GDP in the short term. They are long-term measures, medium to long-term measures, but they're certainly not symbolic. I think it's very important for India to reform. I don't know why political parties don't want to open up the Indian economy. We've seen that opening up, globalizing the Indian economy has always paid dividends. Our growth rates have been higher, and to my mind, this political opposition to some of these reforms is uncalled for.
FDI in retail, Mr. Godrej, is that a threat for you? Is that an opportunity for you, or that will only make a Godrej group more agile?
No, I think from the group point of view, if at all, it won't help us, because FDI for FMCG companies, if FDI comes up, modern retail increases, there might be more private labels, etc. But that's not how I look at it. I think it's good for the country, and that's how we should look at it, not for what is good for our business or what is good for our political party. I think we should look for what is good for the country. And FDI in retail will certainly bring in more investments, more management value, and more integration in the supply chain, the cold chain, etc. So I think it's good for the country. And anyways, we should realize that the more the competition there is, the better off we will be.
Mr. Godrej, do you think the government will be able to push reforms like GST as well as land acquisition?
I hope so. It's difficult for me to tell, because a lot of it depends on the political situation, but these are very important reforms. A reasonable land acquisition bill could be very good, because otherwise both infrastructure and industrial projects are being held up. But the most important reform for the country is the goods and services tax. I think that one reform will add 1.5 percentage points, other things being equal to the GDP growth of the country. So I do hope we are able to introduce it at the earliest. It's a reform that will help contain a lot of our macroeconomic issues, such as fiscal consolidation, inflation. It will also help exports. So I think that's the most important reform to my mind.
Mr. Godrej, what to your mind will revive the investment climate? Because that is the real need of the hour. Do you think for a strong investment cycle to kickstart, we need low interest rates, we need a stable policy regime, or we need some incentives from the government?
Well, all of what you mentioned. I think the interest rates are far too high. It is inhibiting investment. It is also inhibiting consumption of items which are financed, such as residential housing, autos, etc. So interest rates need to be reduced. In my mind, reducing interest rates will lead to lower inflation, because if you reduce interest rates, the rupee will appreciate, because GDP growth will be enhanced. If the rupee appreciates, inflation will come down. So I think it's even contrary to inflation containment to keep interest rates very high. And I do hope the interest rates are reduced by 100 basis points in the within the next couple of months.
Mr. Godrej, the Finance Minister as well would be meeting representatives of FICCI, ASSOCHAM as well as CII. What is up on the agenda for this meeting?
No, the meeting has already taken place yesterday.
Right. So what was really the key takeaway in terms of what really came about? What did the industry bodies...
Industry has suggested to government that the reform process should be continued. We applauded the government action in the recent past, and we've asked the government to continue the reform process. Government asked us to try and work with opposition parties to see that the parliamentary bills which will need to be passed for the reform process to take place also does pass Parliament's muster, and we had a very good discussion on that.
Final question, Mr. Godrej. There are some economists who clearly are of the view that indirectly subsidies is helping Indian consumer, and because at the central level we have a high subsidy burden, that is only helping rural India to spend more and to buy more.
No, you can't run an economy on subsidies. Of course, subsidies will help consumers, but it is against the overall interests of the economy. And if the economy doesn't function well, it hurts consumers in other ways. Now, take for example, if you give subsidies, there's a fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit leads to inflation, which means consumers suffer. So you can't run an economy artificially, and subsidies are artificial. And I think we must get rid of this mania about subsidies in the country. If some sections, economically weak sections, need to be helped, then those perhaps can be tackled. But general subsidies, especially on an item like diesel, which is not consumed by the common man, is, to my mind, not called for.
Mr. Godrej, pleasure having you on the show. Appreciate you taking the time out and chatting with us this morning. Well, good news on the screens. 19,000 here for the Sensex, and that's a level you haven't seen since July 2011. So the Sensex is now powering ahead, 19,030 now for the ticker. Let's see what the